My family manipulated me into buying a $220K house. My sister lived rent-free for 2 years while I paid everything. But when I discovered my parents were using my money to pay their rent, I stopped paying the mortgage and lost $100,000. Now they call me a monster, but I got my life back. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech as a software developer. And honestly, I need to tell this story because I've been carrying this around for months, and I feel like I'm going to explode if I don't get it out. What happened basically destroyed my relationship with my parents and my sister, and even though part of me feels guilty about how it all ended, another part knows I did the right thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me if I screwed up or not. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand the full context. I grew up in a pretty normal family, or so I thought. My parents, Michelle and Anthony, always worked hard but never had much financial stability, you know? My dad Anthony jumped from job to job every 2 or 3 years, and my mom Michelle worked part-time at an accounting office. We weren't poor, but we didn't have much left over either. I have a younger sister, Brittany, who's 25 now, and since we were kids, it was always obvious she was the favorite. I'm not saying that with bitterness. Well, maybe a little, but it's the truth. When I got good grades, it was like, oh, that's nice, Jordan. And when Brittany got a C, it was cause for family celebration. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. When I finished high school, my parents told me they couldn't pay for college, which I understood perfectly because the financial situation was complicated. So I started working whatever I could find. Retail, fast food, a bit of everything. And I saved every penny I could. At 20, I enrolled in a tech school program to study software development, and I paid for it all myself while continuing to work full-time. It was like 2 years of sleeping 4 hours a night and living on coffee and instant ramen, but I did it. I graduated, got a decent job at a tech company, and suddenly I was making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I wasn't a millionaire or anything, but like $75,000 a year at that point, which, for someone who was 22 coming from where I came from, was a lot. Brittany, on the other hand, dropped out of high school in her senior year. She just stopped going one day, and my parents basically said, well, if she doesn't want to study, we're not going to force her. She tried taking some online courses but never finished anything, worked at a Starbucks for like 3 months and then quit because according to her, the manager was horrible to her. Then she worked at a clothing store for a few weeks, at a call center for less than a month, and so on. She always had an excuse for why jobs didn't work out, and my parents always defended her, saying she was finding her path or that she needed time to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. So anyway, a couple years passed, and I was still living in an apartment with 2 roommates, saving what I could after paying my tech school debt and my expenses. Don't get me wrong, I was fine. I was young and didn't need much. But then the conversations with my parents started. At first, it was casual, like, oh, Jordan, how lucky you are to have a good job. I wish we could have our own house instead of continuing to pay rent. And I'd say things like, yeah, someday you'll be able to. You just have to keep saving. But the hints became more and more direct over time. One day, I think it was like mid-2019, my parents came to visit me at the apartment, and after dinner, my dad Anthony dropped the bomb. He said, Jordan, your mom and I have been talking and we want to ask you something important. We need you to help us buy a house. I just sat there processing what I'd just heard and said something like, help you how? Do you want me to lend you money for the down payment? And my mom Michelle came in with, no, honey, we need you to buy the house, for it to be in your name, because we don't qualify for a loan with our credit history and our income. You know what it feels like when your parents put you in that position? It's like, on one hand there are your parents who raised you and everything, and on the other hand there's your common sense screaming at you that this is a terrible idea. I tried to explain to them that I couldn't do that I was just starting my life, that I had my own plans to eventually buy my own place, but then my dad said something that destroyed me. He said, we paid for your education when you were a kid, we paid for every meal, every piece of clothing you wore, every roof over your head for 18 years, and now that you can finally help us after everything we did for you, you're going to turn your back on us? And my mom added that Brittany also needed a stable place, that she was still living with them and was already 23, that it would be good for the whole family to have their own house. They used the family argument, the sacrifice, everything they had done for me. And I, like an idiot, felt guilty. I felt like the worst son in the world for even hesitating. So I said yes. The following months were crazy. I looked at houses with them, talked to real estate agents, did all the documentation for the mortgage loan. I took out all my savings for the down payment. I'm talking about like $40,000 that I had saved over 6 years working like a dog. The house we found cost $220,000, which for the area where we live was relatively affordable for a 3-bedroom house with a yard. My mom, Michelle, wanted something bigger, but I drew the line because I literally couldn't afford more than that with my salary. The monthly mortgage payment was like $1,600 plus taxes and insurance, so like $2,000 a month total. We closed on the purchase in September 2019. I remember perfectly the day I signed all the papers because my hands were shaking and the notary asked me if I was okay. My parents were super excited. They cried when I gave them the keys, and for a moment I thought that maybe I had done the right thing. You know? That maybe this was what it meant to be a good son. The plan was that they would live there, that with what they would save from rent they would help me pay the mortgage. They were paying like 1,200 inches rent at their previous apartment, and that eventually, when I was ready to buy my own house, we could make some kind of arrangement, or they would refinance the house in their name, if by then their credit situation improved. Brittany would move in with them, obviously. It all sounded reasonable in theory, but the first few months, it seemed to be working. My parents gave me $1,000 a month for the mortgage, and I put in the rest out of my pocket. So I was paying like $1,000 monthly for a house I wasn't even living in, while I continued sharing an apartment with roommates, paying 600 inches rent. It was ridiculous, but I told myself it was temporary, that it was helping my family, that it was the right thing to do. Brittany moved in with them but didn't have a job, so she wasn't contributing anything. My parents said she was looking for work, but months went by and she still hadn't found anything. She started spending more and more time at the house, taking over the biggest bedroom, decorating it with her stuff, basically living like a queen without paying a cent. And when I mentioned that maybe she could look for at least a part-time job to help, my parents jumped to defend her, saying she was going through a difficult time and needed family support. Then 2020 came, and the pandemic made everything more complicated. My dad, Anthony's job became unstable. There were cutbacks, and suddenly they told me they couldn't keep giving me the $1,000 monthly if I could cover everything myself for a while. And of course, what was I going to say? They were my parents, living in a house that was technically mine, in the middle of a global pandemic. So I started paying the full $2,000 each month while my savings evaporated. Months went by, and I was getting tighter and tighter financially. I couldn't go out with friends. I couldn't buy myself anything. I was living on the edge just to keep that house afloat. And every time I tried to talk to my parents about the situation, they made me feel guilty, like I was selfish for even mentioning money. At some point in 2021, I think it was like March or April, I went to visit the house without warning because I needed to talk to them about the financial situation. And the house was empty. I mean, there was furniture and everything, but clearly nobody was living there. I called my mom confused and she sounded super nervous, said she would explain later. When I finally sat down with them, it turned out they had moved to a rental apartment like 3 months earlier. 3 months, and nobody had told me anything. And why did they move? Because according to them, the house was too far from my dad's new job and they needed something closer. Okay, reasonable. But why didn't they tell me? And here comes the best part. Because they had given the house to Brittany, my sister, who wasn't paying anything, who didn't have a job, was living alone in a 3-bedroom house while I was still sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 people. My sister had an entire house to herself, while I was paying $2,000 a month for that house, plus my apartment rent. I got furious, like I'd never been so angry in my life. I yelled at them, told them how was it possible that they had made that decision without even consulting me, that I was the owner of the house, that I was literally sacrificing my financial life for them. And my mom, Michelle, started with the tears show, saying that Brittany needed stability, that she had been very depressed, that having her own space was helping her a lot. And my dad, Anthony, said I was selfish, that I had a good job and could afford to help my sister, that family supports each other. I tried to reason with them. I told them, okay, if Brittany is going to live there, then she should pay something. But no. According to them, that would be too much pressure for her. How was she going to pay if she didn't have a job? I suggested she look for a job, any job, and they looked at me like I had suggested something horrible. Anyway, that conversation went nowhere. But here comes the part that really finished convincing me that they were completely using me. A few months later, I was reviewing my bank statements because something wasn't adding up, and I realized I had been giving my parents extra money. They had asked me, like at the beginning of 2021, that in addition to the mortgage, I give them $300 extra a month, because supposedly there were house maintenance expenses, repairs, and stuff like that. And I, like an idiot, had said yes because, well, houses need maintenance, right? Well, it turns out that extra money was never for maintenance. They were using it to pay part of the rent for their new apartment. They were making me indirectly pay their rent, while Brittany lived for free in my house. When I confronted them about this, my dad had the audacity to say that technically I was helping keep the family together, that if they didn't have a place to live, then they couldn't continue supporting Brittany emotionally, and that everything was connected. The logic was so twisted that I didn't even know how to respond in the moment. That was my line. I had reached my limit. I told them that Brittany had two options: start paying at least $800 monthly to cover part of the mortgage, or move out. And if she didn't do either in a month, I would stop paying the mortgage completely. My parents went hysterical, told me I was a monster. How could I do that to my own sister? That I was going to leave her on the street. And I told them that she was 25 years old, that she was an adult, that if I could work and pay for my stuff at 18, then she could too. I gave the ultimatum directly to Brittany as well. I went to the house, knocked on the door, and when she opened, I explained the situation as calmly as possible. She looked at me like I was speaking another language and said something like, "But Mom and Dad said I could stay here, that the house was for the family." I explained that the house was in my name, that I was paying everything, and that I needed her to contribute or leave. She started crying, told me that I had always hated her, that I was always jealous of her. A whole dramatic scene. I tried to stay calm, but honestly I wanted to yell at her to wake up to reality. The month passed and Brittany looked for work. She got something at a coffee shop working like 15 hours a week and gave me $200 the first month. $200. Out of a $2,000 mortgage. And she acted like it was the greatest sacrifice in the world. My parents called to thank me for being patient with her and giving her time to get settled. I was beyond frustration. I was emotionally exhausted. Another month passed, and Brittany gave me $150. When I asked her why, less than the previous month she said she had had extra expenses, that she needed to buy things for the house, clothes, I don't know what else. And that's when I realized that this was never going to change. She was never going to take responsibility. My parents were never going to stop enabling her, and I was going to continue being the family bank until I had nothing left. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I stopped paying the mortgage. Completely. I didn't pay the next month or the next or the next. The bank started calling me, sending me letters, the whole foreclosure process. My parents called me hysterical every week, telling me I was ruining my credit, that I was being irresponsible. How could I do this to Brittany? And I told them, she can leave any time. She can look for a place to rent like any other 5-year-old person. Brittany stayed in the house until the last possible moment. The bank eventually foreclosed on the mortgage. The house went to auction. It sold at a sale for like $180,000. I lost my $40,000 down payment completely, plus all the payments I had made over 2.5 years. We're talking about like $100,000 total that I threw away. Brittany had to move out, obviously, ended up going to live with my parents in their rental apartment, and they had to move to a cheaper place because they couldn't afford the rent on the 2-bedroom apartment between the 3 of them without my financial help. My whole family cut contact with me. My mom sent me a long text message saying I was a horrible son, that I had destroyed the family, that she would never forgive me for leaving my sister homeless. My dad just stopped answering my calls. Brittany blocked me from all social media, and when I tried to talk to her in person, she yelled at me that she wished I had never been born. My aunts and uncles and cousins, who obviously only heard my parents' version, also turned their backs on me. According to them, I'm the villain who threw his younger sister out on the street for being selfish and greedy. And you know what? It hurts. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't affect me because of course it affects me. They're my family. I grew up with them, and now they don't talk to me. But at the same time, I feel enormous relief. It's like I took a giant weight off my shoulders. For 2.5 years, I lived with constant anxiety about money. I worked overtime to be able to cover all the expenses. I had no social life because I couldn't spend on anything. And all for what? So my sister could live for free while I sacrificed myself? After everything exploded, I moved into my own apartment. A tiny studio, but it's just mine. I don't have roommates. I don't have to worry about anyone but myself. My credit is destroyed. I probably won't be able to buy a house for at least the next 7 years, and I lost all my savings. But I'm rebuilding my life little by little. I have a budget that works again. I can go out with friends. I can buy myself things I need without feeling guilty. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if maybe I should have tried something else, if I was too drastic in stopping the mortgage payments. But then I remember all the times I tried to reason with them, all the times I set boundaries that were ignored, and I realized there was no other option. They were using me, period. And I allowed them to do it for too long because I was afraid of being seen as the bad son. Last week, my mom sent me a message after almost a year of not talking to me. It said that Brittany finally got a full-time job at an office, that she's doing well, and that maybe someday we could talk and work things out. She didn't mention an apology, didn't acknowledge anything that happened, just said that things were better now, and that family should be together. I haven't responded. I don't know if I'm going to respond. Part of me wants to believe they can change, that they can finally see what they did to me. But another part knows they're probably only contacting me because they need something or because they feel guilty now that Brittany is functioning without my financial help. The truth is, I don't have the answers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them or if I'll want to have them back in my life. What I do know is that I'll never again let anyone, not even my family, manipulate me using guilt and a sense of obligation. I learned the hard way that helping your family doesn't mean destroying yourself in the process, and that setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, it makes you healthy. So, yeah, I lost $100,000, my credit, and my relationship with my family. But I gained something more important. I gained my freedom and my self-respect. And now that I think about it, it was the price I had to pay to finally grow up and stop being the son who said yes to everything without questioning anything. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse, but that's where I am now. I guess with time things will become clearer, or maybe they won't, and that's okay too. I'm learning to live with uncertainty and to be okay with myself without needing their approval. It's weird, it's difficult, but it's mine.